I learned to recognize shame before I learned to read myself. The way it settles into a child's shoulders. The way their ears burn red. The way they stop meeting your eyes. Thomas Miller had worn shame like a second skin for 3 years. Thomas, please read the next line. I said that October morning. He stood beside his desk, primer shaking in his hands. A cat? Sarah Henshaw whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. The cat. Thomas repeated. The other children giggled. I raised my hand for silence. But the damage was done. Thomas's ears were scarlet. He stared at the floor like it might open and swallow him. I wished it would swallow me instead. After dismissal, I stood at the schoolhouse window watching the children scatter into the prairie after noon. Thomas walked alone. As always, his father would come for him in an hour, after finishing work at the mill. Until then, Thomas sat on the steps tracing patterns in the dust with a stick. I'd been teaching in this frontier town for 6 years. 6 years of primers and slates and children who learned at different speeds. Most of them. Anyway, Thomas didn't seem to learn at all, but I'd noticed things others hadn't. The way he fixed the broken desk leg last month, studying the joint before fitting it back together perfectly. The way he showed younger children number concepts using stones and sticks. His hands moving with certainty even when his mouth couldn't form the words. The way he watched everything, absorbing the world through observation rather than text. Thomas wasn't stupid. He just learned differently. The town didn't see it that way. Miss Clark, Mrs. Henshaw appeared in the doorway, her face pinched with purpose. A word, if you please. I turned from the window. Of course. My Sarah says you're spending considerable time on the Miller boy. She smoothed her skirts. Is that fair to the other students, the ones who can actually learn? I felt something cold settle in my chest. All my students can learn. Mrs. Henshaw, you know what I mean. Her voice dropped to a confidential whisper. The boy is slow. Everyone knows it. Why waste your time? Because I see something you don't. I wanted to say, because 3 years ago, my father called me scatterbrained when I couldn't master mathematics. And I spent the next decade proving worth isn't one-dimensional. Because Thomas deserves better than everyone's low expectations. Instead, I smiled politely. I appreciate your concern, I assure you. All students receive appropriate attention. She left unsatisfied. They always did. I walked to my boarding room behind the mercantile as the autumn cold settled in. Mrs. Peterson had coffee waiting, but I took it to my room. I lived alone, ate alone, existed in the margins between respected and pitied. Single, at 28. A teacher, useful but slightly suspect, the way unmarried women always were. That night, lying in bed, I thought about Thomas's face when Sarah whispered, "Cat." The resignation in his eyes. He'd stopped believing he could learn. Worse, he'd started believing he was stupid. I knew that feeling. Age 8, my father's study, struggling over multiplication tables. Some children just aren't made for thinking. Daughter. The way those words settled into my bones for years. The way I became a teacher partly to prove him wrong, partly to ensure no other child heard those words from me. Tomorrow, I decided, I would ask Thomas to stay after school. Not to punish him, to save him. Even if no one understood why, Superintendent James Hartford arrived on a Tuesday, 2 days early and unannounced. I looked up from the spelling lesson to find him standing in the doorway. Eastern suit, unsmiling face, notebook already open in his hands. Superintendents didn't arrive early unless problems existed. Continue, Miss Clark, he said. Don't mind me. I minded very much. The children sensed something was wrong. They sat straighter, spoke more carefully. All except Thomas, who didn't understand the danger this man represented. "Thomas, please read the next passage," I said, keeping my voice gentle. He stood, opened his primer, stared at the page like it was written in a foreign language, because, in a way, it was, and the Hartford's pen moved across his notebook. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Each mark felt like a verdict. Dog. Thomas finally managed. "The dog ran," I supplied quietly. More scratching from Hartford's pen. I wanted to snatch that notebook and throw it into the stove. Instead, I smiled at Thomas. "Good effort. You may sit." The morning lasted forever. Hartford watched everything, wrote everything, his frown deepening with each of Thomas's struggles. When the children finally left for lunch, he approached my desk. "Miss Clark?" He didn't sit. "I notice you have a student who clearly cannot keep pace with the curriculum." I stood to meet his eyes. "Thomas learns differently. He needs more time. The county cannot justify resources on students who lack capacity." Hartford's voice was clinical, detached. "Perhaps farm work would suit him better. He has capacity. I've seen it. Had I, or was I just stubborn? Belief isn't evidence. Miss Clark?" I felt fury rise in my throat. "Then give me time to gather evidence." He studied me with something like pity. "Time is precisely what we don't have. These children need preparation for the modern world. The slow ones hold back the capable ones." "Thomas isn't slow. He's—" "I'll return for the Christmas pageant," Hartford interrupted. "Show me measurable progress by then. 3 months, Miss Clark. Or I'll recommend the boy for farm placement." He left before I could respond. That afternoon, Jack Miller arrived to collect Thomas. Hartford's words had already reached him somehow. Small towns and their gossip networks. Miller stood in the doorway, hat in his weathered hands. "Superintendent says my boy's too dumb to learn." Maybe he's right. Maybe it's time we accepted that. Thomas stood there staring at his boots while his father and the superintendent discussed his future like he was furniture to be moved. "Mr. Miller, your son stays in school." I heard myself say, "I'll teach him to read." The words hung in the air. I'd just declared war. Miller's laugh was bitter. "You're wasting your time, Miss Clark, but suit yourself." After they left, I sat at my desk in the empty schoolhouse. The autumn light slanted through the windows, golden and indifferent. I'd made a promise I couldn't prove I could keep. I hated Hartford's certainty. The way he reduced Thomas to numbers on a page, efficiency calculations, resource allocations, as if children were ledgers to be balanced. When had I become this woman? The one who fought battles she couldn't win. The next morning, I waited until the other students left before approaching Thomas. "Stay for an hour today," I said. "I'll teach you one-on-one." His eyes widened. "Why? Because you matter. Because everyone deserves someone who believes in them. Because I refuse to let you become what they say you are. Because I think you can learn." I said instead, "But you have to promise not to give up. Even when it's hard." His voice was barely a whisper. "You really think I can learn, Miss Clark?" "I know you can." That afternoon, we sat at the small desk near the window, just the two of us. The schoolhouse felt different, empty, quieter, safer. A place where failure didn't have an audience. I tried flashcards first. Thomas stared at them blankly. I tried oral repetition. He stumbled over the same words again and again. I tried writing on the slate. His letters were backwards, jumbled. After an hour. We'd made no progress. I felt panic rising. What if everyone was right? What if I was just a soft-hearted spinster, seeing what I wanted to see instead, of what was actually there? I'm sorry. Miss Clark, Thomas said quietly. I told you I was stupid. You're not stupid, I said it fiercely. We just haven't found the right way yet. But as he left, I wondered if the right way existed. That night, Hartford's ultimatum echoed in my mind. 3 months, 90 days to prove what couldn't be proven, to teach what couldn't be taught, to save a boy everyone else had already given up on. I remembered being 8 years old, struggling over problems my father found simple. Why can't you think like normal girls? The shame of being deficient. The years it took to believe I wasn't broken, just different. I wouldn't let Thomas spend his life believing he was broken. The next day, I brought sand from the creek, poured it into a shallow box. Trace the letters with your finger, I told Thomas. He looked confused, but tried. His finger moved through the sand, forming an A, then a B. Now say them as you trace. B. Something clicked. I saw it in his face, the connection between hand and mind, touch and meaning. He learns through his hands. I realized, through movement, through physical connection to the letters. I'd been teaching to his ears when I should have been teaching to his fingers. Over the next weeks, we developed a rhythm: trace in sand, write on slate, speak aloud. Slow, repetitive, endless. Some days I wanted to give up. The progress was nearly invisible, 1 word mastered per week. We needed hundreds. But Thomas never quit. He arrived early each morning to stoke the fire, so the schoolhouse was warm for our lessons. He never complained when other children mocked him for baby lessons. He just kept trying. One morning, I found a small wooden apple on my desk, carved carefully, smoothed until it gleamed. No note. I knew who'd left it. I wondered when this had stopped being about proving Hartford wrong, when it had become about Thomas himself, about his quiet determination, about refusing to let the world's measuring stick define his worth. The Christmas pageant loomed. Every student would recite scripture publicly. Thomas needed to read Luke 2:8-14. 7 verses containing words like multitude and heavenly and glory. 3 months to teach what most children learned in 3 years. I set the wooden apple beside my teaching notes. A reminder that some students showed gratitude through actions rather than words. That worth took different forms. October became November. The prairie wind turned cold, carrying the smell of coming winter. Our after-school sessions took on their own sacred rhythm, just Thomas and me. The scratch of slate, the soft hiss of sand shifting under his fingers. Thomas could read 10 words reliably now. Then 15. Progress measured in grains of sand, but progress nonetheless. I discovered he learned best through patterns and repetition. We'd trace a word 20 times, 30 times, until his hand knew it as well as his mind. Dog became a pattern of curves and lines his fingers recognized before his eyes did. Why do you come early to stoke the fire? I asked one morning, finding the schoolhouse already warm. Thomas shrugged, not meeting my eye. You stay late for me. Seemed fair. Fairness. He understood fairness when he couldn't understand the... I felt something warm replace the defensive cold I'd carried for months. This boy wasn't broken. The world was just measuring him wrong. The other children still mocked him sometimes. Thomas needs baby lessons, they'd whisper. But I noticed something changing. The younger students came to Thomas when they struggled with arithmetic, because he could show them with stones and sticks better than I could explain with words. His hands understood what his mouth couldn't articulate. Mrs. Henshaw still complained. The school board received letters. But Reverend Matthews stopped by one evening. His wife beside him. "We hear you're doing extra work with the Miller boy," he said, "for the Christmas pageant." I braced for criticism. Instead, he smiled. "We'd like to donate lamp oil for your evening lessons." It was the first support I'd received. I felt gratitude well up, unexpected and overwhelming. "Thank you. Not everyone believes that boy is hopeless," Mrs. Matthews said quietly. "Some of us see what you're doing." After they left, I sat in the lamplight feeling less alone. Maybe I wasn't completely fighting this battle by myself. By mid-November, Thomas could read simple sentences. The dog ran. The cat sat. Small victories that felt enormous. But the Christmas passage haunted us. Luke 2:8-14. The angels appearing to shepherds. Words like multitude that twisted his tongue. Words like glory that he tried for the 5th day straight and still couldn't master. G-g. He'd start. Then stop. Glor-e, glory. I'd correct gently. Try again. Days passed, then weeks. I stopped counting how many words we'd mastered. Started counting other things instead. How many times he smiled when a word clicked into place. How many times I felt something shift in my chest, watching his determination. We were teaching each other, though he didn't know it yet. He was learning to read. I was learning that some battles were worth fighting, even when victory seemed impossible. One afternoon, Thomas traced glory in the sand for the 100th time. His finger paused, then moved with certainty. Glory, he said clearly. I felt tears prick my eyes. Yes, glory. He looked up, and his whole face was light, pure joy. The kind that comes from conquering something everyone said was impossible. I thought about my father's study, the multiplication tables I couldn't solve, the way he'd called me scatterbrained, the years it took to believe I wasn't deficient. Just different. Thomas wasn't deficient. He was different. And I'd spent 6 years in this town learning that different was the worst thing you could be. Unless you had someone who refused to accept that verdict, I was that someone for Thomas. The way no one had been that someone for me that night, walking home through November cold. I realized something. I wasn't just fighting for Thomas to read. I wasn't just fighting to prove Hartford wrong. I was fighting to rewrite a story I couldn't rewrite for myself, the story where someone believes in the struggling child, where patience wins over judgment, where worth gets recognized instead of dismissed. 3 weeks until the Christmas pageant. Thomas knew about half the words in the passage. The other half were prayers and hope and faith in what couldn't yet be proven. I picked up the wooden apple from my desk, ran my thumb over its smooth surface. Some students showed love through carved gifts. Some teachers showed love through refusing to give up. We were both learning what love looked like. 3 weeks before the pageant, we stayed past dark. Thomas was exhausted. I was exhausted. The lamplight flickered, our shadows dancing on the schoolhouse walls. Multitude, I said, for the 20th time that evening. Try it again. Multi. Thomas's voice cracked. I can't. You can break it down. Multitude. Multitude. He got it wrong again, and suddenly, he was crying. Not loud sobs, just silent tears sliding down his face. The kind of crying that comes from being 12 years old and disappointing everyone, including yourself. I'm too stupid. Miss Clark, Papa's right. Something broke open in my chest. I did something I'd never done, pulled my chair beside his instead of across from him, sat close enough to touch his shoulder. "Thomas, listen to me." My voice was fierce. "You are not stupid. Your mind is different. And that makes you special. Not broken. Do you understand?" He shook his head. He didn't believe me. I realized then I wasn't just fighting for him to read. I was fighting for him to believe in his own worth. And I knew why it mattered so much. Because no one had fought that battle for me. When I was 8, my father had called me scatterbrained. When I was 15, he'd said women weren't made for serious thinking. I'd become a teacher partly to prove him wrong, to prove I had worth beyond what he could measure. But this wasn't about me. This was about a 12-year-old boy who deserved to know he mattered. "Tomorrow," I said, "we're trying something different." That night in my room, I cried for the first time in months. For Thomas, for my 8-year-old self, for every child who'd been told they were too stupid, too slow, too different to matter. The next day, I changed my approach. "Tell me the Christmas story in your own words. Thomas, don't read it. Just tell it to me." He looked confused but started speaking. "There were shepherds watching their sheep at night. And angels came and told them about baby Jesus being born. And they said, 'Glory to God.'" He spoke it beautifully. He knew the story, understood it, felt it. "You see," I said, "you know this. Now we're just matching words you already know to marks on paper. You're not learning something new. You're learning a different language for something you already understand." Something shifted in his eyes. Understanding, hope. We worked differently after that. I'd have him tell me what a word meant before reading it. Connect the meaning to the letters. His mind could hold concepts his mouth struggled to pronounce. And slowly, painfully, the passage started to make sense. Our connection deepened. We weren't teacher and struggling student anymore. We were allies in a battle against time and expectation and everyone who'd decided Thomas couldn't learn. He trusted me now, completely. I could see it in the way he tried harder, pushed further, without fear of disappointing me, because he knew I wouldn't give up on him. That trust terrified me. What if I failed him one afternoon? Hartford appeared at the window. I saw his shadow before I saw his face. He watched our session for 10 minutes. His expression unreadable. Later, he stopped me outside. "The pageant is December 22nd. Miss Clark, I'll be there. Not encouragement, not condemnation, just a statement." Something in his voice had softened. Though, or maybe I was just desperate to hear support where none existed. I walked home that evening, thinking about trust. How Thomas trusted me to see him clearly. How I needed to trust that what I saw was real, not just wishful thinking. When had his struggle become my struggle? When had I started seeing myself in his shame? My father's voice in his father's dismissal that night. I understood something I'd been avoiding. I couldn't save Thomas without confronting what had broken in me years ago. We were both fighting the same battle, the right to be seen as we were, not as others decided we should be. 2 weeks until the pageant. Thomas read half the passage reliably now. The other half wavered, uncertain. We were running out of time, but the next morning, Thomas worked with new determination, and I worked with new understanding. We were teaching each other. He was learning to read. I was learning that some wounds only heal when you stop them from happening to someone else. 2 weeks before the pageant, Mrs. Henshaw went to the school board. She brought 5 other parents with her. They claimed I was neglecting other students to focus on Thomas. They wanted him removed from the pageant to spare him embarrassment. The board called a meeting. Church basement. 15 faces watching me explain why I was wasting everyone's time on a boy who couldn't learn. Mrs. Henshaw spoke first. It's cruel to make that boy perform when everyone knows he'll fail. Miss Clark is setting him up for public humiliation. Thomas will not fail, I said. My voice was steady. My hands were shaking. He's made extraordinary progress. He deserves the chance to show what he's learned. Board member Thompson leaned forward. And if he can't do it, you'll humiliate yourself and him in front of the whole town. Then I'll accept that consequence. But I believe in him. Did I? God help me. Did I really believe? Or was I just too stubborn to admit defeat they voted? 5-4. Thomas could participate. Barely. But the damage was done. The whole town now expected his failure. Men at the saloon were placing bets on whether he'd make it through 3 words. I heard about it from Mrs. Peterson, who heard it from her cousin who tended bar. The next day, Thomas was silent during our lesson. He traced letters mechanically, his mind somewhere else. Finally, he spoke. I heard Papa talking to Mama. He said I shouldn't do the pageant, that I'll shame the family. My heart broke. What do you want to do? Thomas? Long pause. The lamplight flickered. Outside. Winter wind rattled the windows. I want to try. Miss Clark, even if I fail, I want to try. The way he looked at me when he said it, that look would sustain me through whatever came next. Win or lose, he was choosing courage. How could I choose anything less than we're doing this? I said firmly, together. We had 12 days. The passage was 7 verses. Thomas knew about half the words reliably. The other half were prayers and hope. We worked with desperate intensity. Trace, write, speak. Rhythm, repetition, endless practice. Some nights, we worked until my lamp oil ran low and the cold crept through the walls. Other students noticed. A few stopped mocking. They'd seen how hard Thomas worked, how much he wanted this. Even Sarah Henshaw looked at him differently now. Like maybe he wasn't just the stupid boy. Maybe he was brave. The town watched us, some with sympathy, most with the anticipation of witnessing failure. Either way, we'd become entertainment. The teacher who believed too much, and the boy who couldn't learn. One evening, Hartford appeared in the doorway. I looked up, prepared for criticism. Instead, he held out a book. Larger print, clearer type. His voice was gruff. Might help. He left before I could thank him. I stared at the book in my hands. Hartford had just actively supported our effort rather than simply tolerating it. Something had changed. Or maybe I'd been wrong about him all along. Maybe he wanted Thomas to succeed too. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. That night, I sat with the new reader, running my fingers over the larger letters. I'd become what I'd always feared the subject of town gossip, the woman whose judgment was questioned, whose competence was doubted. But I'd also become something else, someone willing to stand alone for what mattered. The wooden apple sat on my desk. Thomas's gift. His faith in me, carved into wood. 8 days until the pageant. 8 days to prove that belief could become reality, that faith wasn't foolishness. That worth wasn't measured by reading speed, but by the courage to try when everyone expected you to fail, 4 days before the pageant. Thomas's mind went blank during practice. He stood at the front of the schoolhouse, the passage open before him. I'd seen him read these words yesterday, but today, nothing. His hands shook. His face went pale. Performance anxiety had paralyzed him completely. "It's all right," I said gently. "We'll try again tomorrow." But we both knew tomorrow might bring the same blankness. That night, I sat in my room staring at my teaching certificate on the wall. 6 years of service. 6 years of building a reputation. If Thomas failed publicly, I'd likely lose my position. Hartford would have his proof that I'd wasted resources. The parents would be vindicated. I drafted a letter to Hartford. My hand moved, almost without thought. Upon reflection, Thomas Miller will participate in the pageant in a non-speaking role. My pen hovered over the signature line. This was the moment. I could protect my reputation, my position, my future. All I had to do was sign. I stared at those words, saw what they really meant, saw Thomas's face when I told him I was giving up, saw his father's bitter satisfaction. I told you he was too dumb. Saw my own reflection in the window, and recognized the coward looking back. What was I afraid of losing my job? My standing in the community. I was afraid of failing. Thomas. Of promising him he mattered, and then proving I was wrong. Of confirming what his father said, that he was too dumb to learn. What if I'd done more harm than good? What if my stubbornness had given him hope, just to crush it more? Completely I thought about my father's study. Age 10. Struggling with a math problem I couldn't solve. Working for hours while he watched. Impatient. Finally, he'd sighed. Some people just aren't made for thinking. Daughter. Those words had lived in my bones for years. Even now, teaching other people's children, I sometimes heard his voice, scatterbrained. Not made for thinking, too stupid to understand. I'd become a teacher to prove him wrong. But more than that, to ensure no other child heard those words from me. And here I was, about to abandon Thomas to protect myself. A knock on my door. Mrs. Peterson handed me a folded note. From Reverend Matthews. He asked me to give it to you tonight. I unfolded the paper. One line, written in careful script. Faith is not faith until it's all you're holding on to. Hebrews 11:1. I sat there with that unsigned letter and understood what faith actually cost. It was easy to believe when evidence supported you, when success seemed likely, when the risk was small. But real faith, was believing when all you had was conviction, when evidence said you were wrong. When the cost of failing was everything, maybe I was a fool. Maybe Hartford and the parents and Jack Miller were all right, and I was just a stubborn woman who couldn't admit defeat. But I'd rather be a fool who believed in Thomas than a realist who gave up on him. Some failures were worth risking. I held the letter over the lamp flame, watched the paper curl and blacken, watched my escape route burn away. When had I stopped being the girl who believed her father? When had I become the woman who refused to let another child hear those words, too dumb to learn? Somewhere between that study and this schoolhouse, I'd decided that if I couldn't save myself from those voices, at least I could save someone else. The next morning, I met Thomas at the schoolhouse door. We're doing this, I said. Not because I need to prove anything, but because you deserve to stand up there with everyone else. You belong in that pageant, Thomas, and I believe you can do it. He searched my face, looking for doubt. Maybe. Or permission to quit. He found neither. Okay, he whispered. Okay. 3 days of final preparation. Thomas worked until his hands cramped from tracing words. I worked until my voice went hoarse from repetition. And on the final practice, December 21st, the night before the pageant, he read the entire passage, haltingly. Yes, pausing on some words, but accurately, every single word. We looked at each other in the lamplight, and I saw something I'd been praying for. He believed, not in me, in himself. "I can do this," he whispered. "Yes," I said. "You can." And for the first time in 3 months, I meant it without reservation. December 22nd, 1884. The schoolhouse was packed by 10 in the morning. Every family in town. Curious onlookers who'd heard about the stupid Miller boy trying to read. People from neighboring farms who'd traveled through winter cold to witness what everyone assumed would be spectacular failure. The schoolhouse had never held so many people. Pine garlands decorated the walls. Candles flickered on every surface. The smell of wood smoke and winter wool and anticipation filled the air. Beautiful and terrifying. I stood at the side, watching families settle into chairs, watching Thomas sit with the other students, his face pale but determined, watching Jack Miller and his wife take seats in the very back, as far from the front as possible. Hartford found me before the program started. "Miss Clark?" His voice was low. "It's not too late to substitute another student. Save yourself the embarrassment." This was it. The final chance to protect myself, my reputation, my position, my future. Superintendent Hartford. I met his eyes. "Thomas will recite, because I believe in him, and he deserves this chance. If that costs me my position, so be it." His eyebrows rose. So be it, indeed. He walked away. I felt something settle in my chest. Clarity, peace. I'd made my choice. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 3 months, for 6 years, for my whole life. Maybe the moment I chose who I would be. The woman who stood, not the woman who yielded. The program began. Younger students recited first. Sweet voices filling the decorated schoolhouse. Their parents beamed. Everything was as it should be. The world before Thomas's turn felt innocent, untested. Then Reverend Matthew stood. "Thomas Miller will now recite Luke, chapter 2, verses 8 through 14. The room didn't go quiet. It got quieter. The quality of silence when people are waiting for disaster. Excited, anticipatory. The way crowds gather for executions. Thomas stood, walked to the front. I saw his hands trembling. Saw him clutching the Bible I'd lent him, the same one we'd practiced with for 3 months. He looked at me. I nodded. Everything depended on this moment. He opened the Bible, found the passage, looked at the words we'd traced and written and spoken 1,000 times. And there were in the same country shepherds. He began. His voice was soft, but steady. Abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. Mrs. Henshaw's mouth fell open. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them. And the glory of the Lord shone round about them. Parents leaned forward. The mockery had evaporated. They were actually listening, and they were sore afraid. And the angel said unto them, "Fear not, for, behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. Perfect, every word perfect." My hands were shaking. I pressed them together. Watched Thomas's face as he read. Watched him become exactly what everyone said he couldn't be. "For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign unto you. Ye shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger." His voice grew stronger with each word. Confidence building. The realization that he could do this. That he was doing it. And suddenly, there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God, and saying multitude. The word that had broken him 2 weeks ago. He paused for just a heartbeat, then continued, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men." He closed the Bible. The room was utterly silent. Then I saw him. Jack Miller, standing in the back, crying. Not quiet tears. His whole face was wet. His body shook with sobs. He wasn't trying to hide. His wife gripped his arm, crying too. Thomas's father, the man who'd called his son too dumb to learn, the man who'd told me I was wasting my time. He was crying, like his heart was breaking, or mending. Sometimes those look the same. I watched Thomas watch his father, saw the boy's face transform. He'd just learned something more important than reading. He'd learned he wasn't broken. The applause started slowly, then built. Students surrounded Thomas. Parents I barely knew shook my hand. The Reverend gripped my shoulder. "Well done. Miss Clark, well done." But I barely heard any of it. I was watching Jack Miller push through the crowd toward his son. He pulled Thomas into his arms, held him tight while he sobbed. I was wrong. He kept saying, "I was so wrong about you." This was why I taught, not for Hartford's approval or the parents' vindication or my own pride, for this moment when a father saw his son, really saw him for the first time. When Thomas saw himself reflected in his father's tears and understood I am not stupid, I am not broken, I am enough. After the program ended, Jack Miller found me, hat in his weathered hands, face still wet. "Miss Clark, His voice broke. "I told you he was too dumb. I was wrong. I was so wrong. You weren't wrong about Thomas. Mr. Miller?" I said it gently. "You were wrong about what intelligence looks like. Your son is brilliant. He just needed someone to see how." He broke down again. "Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on my boy." Hartford approached as the crowd thinned. For a long moment, he just looked at me. Then he extended his hand. "Miss Clark." I stand corrected. I shook his hand, felt years of judgment shift. Not disappear, just shift. The week after the pageant, 3 parents asked if I'd work with their struggling students after school. The school board approved a small budget for specialized instruction. Hartford recommended me for a teaching excellence recognition from the county. But the real change was Thomas. He read at grade level within 6 months. Devoured books like he was making up for lost time. Became the student who helped others patient. Kind. Remembering what it felt like to struggle. His father came to every school event now, standing a little taller, meeting my eye with gratitude that never quite faded. I still taught in the same schoolhouse. I was 30 now. Still Miss Clark. Unmarried. Likely to remain so. The town saw me differently, though not as the soft-hearted spinster teacher, but as someone who saw clearly. Hartford visited twice a year now, always observing my work with struggling students. Last month he said something I never expected. "Miss Clark, you taught me that efficiency isn't the same as effectiveness. Some students need more time. That doesn't make the time wasted." Thomas graduated at 14, reading better than half his class. He wanted to be a teacher himself someday. "So I can help kids like me," he said. I kept the wooden apple he'd carved on my desk. On difficult days when a student struggled and I was tempted to give up, I'd pick it up and remember. Intelligence isn't one thing. Worth isn't measured by speed of learning. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is refusing to accept the world's verdict about their Value. The schoolhouse had 12 students receiving specialized instruction now. Hartford approved funding for an assistant teacher. We were building something slowly, carefully. One struggling student at a time. This wasn't the life people expected for me. No husband, no children of my own. Just this small schoolhouse and students who needed someone to believe in them. But sometimes I wondered what my life would look like if I'd signed that letter. If I'd withdrawn Thomas from the pageant to protect myself, I'd probably have fewer parent complaints. More social invitations, an easier path. But I wouldn't have this. 12 students who society labeled too slow, now reading, writing, believing in themselves. I wouldn't have Thomas's visits, bringing his younger siblings for help. I wouldn't have Jack Miller's nod of respect in church every Sunday. I wouldn't have become the woman I needed to be. Winter evening now, lamp burning low. I'm working with a new student, Emma, age 9, who can't learn. I trace letters with her, patient, certain. Outside, snow falls soft on the prairie. Thomas would be proud. I think. Then I correct myself. I'm proud. Of him. Of Emma. Of the woman I fought to become. The woman who stands when everyone else sits. Who believes when everyone else doubts. Who sees worth when everyone else sees failure. I've learned something the town is still learning. Everyone can learn. They just need someone who refuses to give up. And I've never been good at giving up. Emma traces an A in the sand, her small finger careful and deliberate. She looks up at me with hope in her eyes. Like that. Miss Clark, exactly like that. This is the life I chose, the life I built, one struggling student at a time. And I wouldn't trade it for anything.